Only Love is Real is Dr. Brian Weiss's third book. His first book, Many Lives, Many Masters, focused on the personal revelation that happened with one major case study and was so valuable in informing people of the existence of past life regression. His second book, Through Time into Healing, saw him settle into the business of practicing past life regression with many types of clients with many types of issues, and so was valuable in educating people into the depths and abilities of past life regression. Only Love is Real reverts back to focusing on essentially a single case study, although it's the same story told from two sides by two clients of Brian Weiss's. So it enables us to go into a lot of depth on how past life regression is practiced, but while still educating us into a lot of the nuances of what past life regression is really all about. And it would illustrate a theme that would come up strongly in his book on the principles and spiritual lessons that come in past life regression. And that theme and that lesson is love. Hi, I'm Mark Beale. I'm a past life regression therapist, a hypnotherapist, and a certification trainer. And I'm the author of the book, Past Life Awakening, 7 Regression Case Studies Illustrate 7 Spiritual Laws, which you can get as a paperback, ebook, or Kindle from bookstores. Check the links in the description. So in this book, we get the story of two souls that incarnate and play the roles of Elizabeth and Pedro. And as we go through it, we see them learn their spiritual lessons. Yet as any client learns lessons, so does the therapist who helps elicit them, but also witnesses them. And when the therapist turns writer, then they're able to pass on the messages to us, the faithful readers. Weiss's role as a guide is of particular significance, and what makes the past life regression of these two people extraordinary. Now, it is extraordinary, but still fairly common that we can regress to past lives to go through issues with ourselves, and in healing those issues, they make our current relationships more healthy. And we can do this with people who are currently in relationships that need healing. Only Love is Real becomes extraordinary is that it is about two people, but they had not met yet in this life. Both of them were clients of Dr. Weiss, and it's only after some time that he realizes the past life narrative stories he's hearing from two different clients actually involve overlapping past lives. Weiss then has to face the ethical choice of whether he in any way breaks a form of client confidentiality by sharing that overlapping information, or in seeing if or how they could make a connection in this life. Now, it's also extraordinary because it verifies in a very vivid way that in this case, past life regression is literal and it's not a fantasy, because this is two separate, consensually agreed realities shared by two people and witnessed by a third in Brian Weiss. Now, in Brian Weiss's first book, the story became personal when his client went off script from her past life narrative and went into the master spirits who were speaking to Dr. Weiss about his life. So that then emphasized, not just in part, but as half of the whole book, the between lives realm. Now, in this book, we go back to emphasizing as a vast majority past life narratives. Yet we can still see that the master spirits are active, but this time they're in the background in guiding these two clients to the same therapist who can elicit their past lives and help them then to move forward. So in that subtle background way, the master spirits do come through to give lessons on the spiritual nature of both personal and universal love. Now, I won't give away too much of the actual story so as to be a spoiler for the plot, but I will continue to point out the key themes and meanings of why this book's important and what it really implicitly says and teaches us about past life regression and about spiritual awakening and about love. So Weiss covers many aspects of past life regression in this book. He actually does detail the process more than he had before. He talks about his use of rapid hypnotic inductions, which all good hypnotists will know about. He talks about the role of dreams in past lives. And he talks about the use of regression to this life, which is part of establishing patterns in this life that we can then match to patterns in past life once we get to them. He also gives context about the two clients so we can start to know these people not as subject X who channels whatever about the afterlife, but as real people living in the real world with narratives in this life and past lives. So both of these clients are 29 years old and they both now live in Miami, and it's a male-female relationship. So Elizabeth is a white-collar professional born in the Midwest who came out to study and now lives in Miami. She comes for therapy because she's been suffering grief from the recent death of her youngish mother from a fast-acting cancer, and she also has been having problems in her relationship with men as an ongoing pattern. The other person involved is Pedro. He is a business owner from a wealthy family in Mexico City who's been living for some years in Miami, but is due to return to Mexico City in a few months as his father's retiring and he needs to take over the family businesses and properties. Pedro has also been grieving the loss of his brother in a tragic accident. And in terms of his relationships, he's dealing with guilt over his own conduct and the consequences of a relationship he had with a married woman in his youth. So the past life regression begins when Elizabeth has a past life session and regresses to a life in Palestine in the time of the Roman Empire, where her beloved father is killed by careless Roman soldiers. 2 months later, Pedro is a client and has past life regression sessions in which he recalls comforting his beloved daughter as he dies in the hands of careless Roman soldiers in Palestine. Now, because of Weiss's workload and the distance between those sessions, he initially didn't put those pieces together. When he finally did, he had a number of other past life sessions with them, and he could go through them systematically and look for other crossovers in other past lives. So all that's fascinating, but spoiler alert's over. To find the rest of those details, you can read the book yourself. But what I can say is this, that with this general understanding, we can see that Soulmates is a key teaching and an important antidote to the romanticized version of what a soulmate is, even as he speaks about only love being real. The story does not show soulmates that are a synonym for continually meeting romantic partners. The lovers do not simply repeat the same boy-girl story again and again throughout time. In that example, rather than being lovers once more, they were father and daughter. So this shows us that the reality of soulmates is that they transcend the dualistic boundaries of gender and age. Now, once Weiss realizes the connection, he also realizes that Pedro is soon due to return to Mexico, and he is very reluctant to make the introduction between the two of them. He weighs up his options, and to find out what happens, read the book. But as he weighs those options, he considers what would happen if he didn't introduce them and what could happen if he did. So here's what he says about the scenario in which he doesn't introduce them and what that may tell us about karmic connections and the role of soulmates. So he says, quote, "You will not always marry your most strongly bonded soulmate. There may be more than one for you because soul families travel together. You might choose to marry a less bonded soul companion, but one who has something specific to teach you or learn from you. Your recognition of a soulmate may occur later in life, after both of you have already committed to your present life families, or your strongest soulmate connection may be to your parent or to your child or to your sibling. Or your strongest connection may be to a soulmate who has not incarnated during your lifetime and who is watching over you from the other side like a guardian angel." End quote. Now, with soulmates, a last romantic tendency in a book or a movie is the desire for a Hollywood ending where they finally get together and ride off into the sunset together. So most love stories are just the story really of the meet cute, of the initial romance, of the we find, do they, don't they, and finally getting together. The story ends where reality actually begins. And while we fudge the reality of the 60 years of relationship that need to follow, we're quite quick to jump in and assume that anything that's not a happily ever after from that point on is framed as a failure. Weiss addresses this popular fiction nicely when he says, quote, "Sometimes soulmates decide not to get married while incarnated. They arrange to meet, to stay together until the agreed upon task is completed, and then to move on. Their agendas, their lesson plans for the entirety of this life are different, and they do not want or need to spend all of this lifetime together. This is not a tragedy, only a matter of learning. We have eternal life together, but sometimes you may need to take separate classes." End quote. So that is a great point, and it concludes the review of the narrative in this book. But it's worth noticing that a feature in this book is that at the beginning of every chapter there is a quote from other books or writers, mainly from classical Western literature that very specifically reference past lives. And these quotes are often quite long. They're a significant big part of the book. Let's not overlook them. These writers include Goethe, Voltaire, Tolstoy, Victor Hugo, W.B. Yeats, Wordsworth, Henry David Thoreau, and Walt Whitman. Now, these quotes are notable for two reasons. Why did he choose them? What is it telling us? Weiss could have chosen many great quotes from ancient and Eastern writers and religions, but he didn't, because by choosing these writers from more recent Western literature, he shows a Western audience that our closer, wise forefathers still did reference past lives in their worldview. So these quotes make reincarnation and past lives implicitly a part of our own Western culture, for those of us like myself that were born in the West. Now for me, there's a second reason why this is notable. This is Weiss's third book. In his second book, Weiss continued to grapple with the idea of acceptance or rejection from the medical and scientific professions and sought backing and reassurance from a doctor in Dr. Moody, who writes about near-death experiences. And that helped him justify the risk that he took in releasing material about past lives into the modern world, and by again gathering some sort of scientific validation. There is no quote or introduction from a scientist in this book. There's not as much reference to science, and I think that's because in this book, the third book, Weiss has relaxed. He's still quoting references for support, but now they come from art and literature and not from science. And I personally applaud this move. There are those in the past life regression world who would like to appeal to the world of science, whose job it is to weigh, measure, divide, and count up the parts of the conventional physical world. But for me, past life regression is not really a science, because it is proudly an art and a spiritual practice, as it offers parables that points towards a unified ultimate reality. In past life regression, we have the quote that we don't claim to know exactly how it works, but we observe and testify that it does work. Now, some things can never be proven by science, but it does not mean that they are not a driving force of the rules of the universe. And we live in a universe that is both scientific and spiritually artistic. Science still puzzles over dark matter and consciousness itself. Science can still not quantify, measure, and prove the existence of love. And though Weiss cannot prove it, he is willing to state the poetry that only love is real. And he takes that proof from past lives, and past lives will likely remain forever unprovable and unquantifiable in a scientific term. Just like another beautifully scientifically unquantifiable theme of his book, which is love. That unseen and immeasurable but undeniable driving force in our world. And that's okay, because there will always exist to the mind of man some delightful mystery. So I'll leave some mystery to this book, but encourage any past life regression practitioner to read it for its many insights that it gives into the process of doing and understanding past life regression as a modality, in addition to the transcendent love story of Soulmates itself. To get my book, Past Life Awakening, 7 Regression Case Studies Illustrate 7 Spiritual Laws, which you can get as a paperback, ebook, or Kindle, check the links in the description. To have hypnotherapy or past life regression sessions with me, click the link below. To get training with me that includes video courses, technical manuals, session swaps with fellow students, and can include personal mentoring with me, click the links to learn hypnotherapy with my Hypnotherapy Specialist Institute, or past life regression, spirit release between lives with my Past Life Awakening Institute.